I'm very excited to welcome our next guest. Her name is Chiu, and she comes from a couple really cool pedigrees. She went to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or otherwise known as MIT, got her MS and BS in electrical engineering, which gives her a really cool background. And then went to a little school in California called Stanford, where she got her MBA. But right now she sits as a member on the board of directors of a couple really cool organizations. One is Candidate.Guru, a startup out of South Florida, as well as a really cool retail group called Bells, which is also centered here in Florida. But that gives her a really cool insight into the world of retail. And right now she's the managing general partner of the Fan Fund, which also gives her a great background to answer a lot of questions on funding and logistics and how to really kind of capitalize the business and bring it to market strong. So I really appreciate your time, Kathy. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So, to get started, a great question that we get all the time is, how can I best avoid, a shortage of capital and cash flow, during growth? Because whenever somebody's launching a retail business, especially, that's always a big concern.
Right. Well, I think there's a couple things. One is, so a lot of times entrepreneurs don't like to, the most entrepreneurs I know really like to be out there selling and looking at the market, and they don't like to sit in front of their computer and build Excel spreadsheets and whatnot. And I just kind of want to encourage people to at least have a ballpark estimate of, to the best, because entrepreneurship is a very uncertain endeavor. What you really want is you want to die a way that you don't expect. You don't want to die a way that you could have guessed. And so right. I would say one is just to kind of anticipate some known needs. Two is to be really creative regarding kind of, what sources of capitals are out there, because it's not always what people think. You don't always want an investor. So, I would just, say that's the most important.
Well, that actually brings up a really interesting question. One of our member questions, which I was going to get to a little bit later, but it kind of fits in now. What are the benefits to, using a private investor, and, what kind of different types of private investors are there for small business?
Sure. So if you think about kind of the capital continuum, this is what investors talk about, what happens at the very beginning and when you get bigger and bigger. Right. You're going to need different funders. The very first dollar should be your own. Like if even you can eat your own dog food, you maybe don't want to be doing it. So it should be your own. Tap out everything you could, because assuming that you're going to make money, why let other people come and dilute you, right? Then the second will be, anybody that you can get who trust you and believe in you, because at the beginning it's really hard to articulate your value to a professional investor, and you're likely to be under-diluted because they want to be on the safe side, and you obviously want the best valuation. So only people who really want to help you would do that. And also be thinking about non-dilutive funding. If whatever you're selling has any sort of societal benefit, there may be, some sort of grant that you could have, by saying this is a cause, this helps people. So once you've exhausted all that, try all these business pitch competition, everything, to get some small amount at the beginning. But then, especially in retail, I think a lot of money is tied up in building up inventory. Be thinking about creative way to fund that. For example, there's a lot of GoFundMe and, kind of crowdfunding type of things, where the mechanism is, it's not really even an investment. It's a pre-order, basically, right? You're saying, hey, I've got this cool thing. All I have is a prototype. But if you think this is cool, fund me right now and you'll get the first product. Right. So if you think it's not really an equity, so that's good. You're not diluted. And not only that, you're testing the market. If you did this campaign and nobody will buy it, tells you something about maybe you got to rethink. So I would say exhaust all that. And once you've got that very first hump, you've got a proven market, when you're ready to scale, that's when you go to funders, institutional people. Private investors, you're saying, that versus bank. Well, simple, because sometimes you're not bankable. Okay. It's that simple. But also, some private investors are strategic. So if you are in a specific market where there are people who could potentially mentor you, the only way they're going to get interested is if they have a piece of it. Well, okay, maybe that's the time to think, maybe I'll let you buy in. And it should be a win-win.
So going to a private investor is much more of a kind of them buying into your company, whereas venture capital is looking for that opportunity. That's interesting.
Right.
Okay.
So I would say, in terms of the very beginning, because individual investors can be really hard to deal with, because they're unpredictable. So you really want people that you trust and have that rapport and almost a mentor relationship, versus some random person who's just trying to spray 10 deals whatever.
It's interesting to think about. What are some ways that somebody could get a venture capitalist, if they're trying to go that route, or a private investor to pay attention to them to really stand out?
The way to think about venture capitalists, the first thing is just to think, do I even want to spend energy? Because they would ask a lot of questions, and due diligence process, they want you to produce all kinds of documents. You may or may not have the energy to do that. So the first thing is just to think, do I produce the kind of return to them and still have enough left for me to be interesting?
Right.
So a venture capitalist is looking for this. The sing-songy way is 3 to 5 times in 3 to 5 years. And granted, that's a very broad number in terms of IRR, meaning annual returns, and in terms of 3 to 5, that's a big range. But that's what they're looking for. So if you had this cute little business that was going to grow 10% a year, you very well could build a nice family business, and your grandchild could be in it and all that. But you don't want to bring in a VC, because it would be a bad experience for you and for them.
Understood. I think that's a huge piece of advice you just gave. And I think that really knowing your business is kind of the backbone that you're hitting on. What kind of goals you want to set for yourself is really where you should go to get capital to fund the business. But how likely is it that if you went for capital, you get it?
So people like to talk about numbers, and there are all kinds of numbers you can find on the internet, and they'll come in all different ranges. But some people will say 1% gets funded, and you go, oh my gosh, why would it? But 1% out of 100, a lot of them are really just 50 business plans that didn't make any sense. But I would say, instead of worrying too much about the statistics, start with whether or not you fit the criteria, knowing that's what they want. They want you to return 3 times the money in 3 to 5 years. Can you do it? And if you start with that, then you can say, well, do I have a story, right? And I think knowing your business partially is, and it's a good exercise, because whether or not you find that you fit or don't fit, you want to know the answer, and then you want to know what options you have.
You mentioned before that they would ask for a lot of information. Can you give any examples of what kind of information you should have prepared, and kind of how to structure your company while you're growing so you can be viable when you get to the point that you want to go that route?
Sure. So if you are a company that's already in operation, have revenue, then obviously all the financials are very important. But I think VC due diligence really comes in 2 different stages. The first one is, do we even want to do this from a business perspective? And then the second phase is the verification phase. So don't even worry about verification until you got through the business makes sense, for both you and the investor. And so that part is very strategic. Right? You need to have your financials. You need to understand your market. Who's your supplier? Who are your competitors? You really do need to know that. And usually, being on the investor side, a lot of times we see entrepreneurs really just know kind of their day to day. I keep on bumping into this one guy. Well, maybe because you're playing so far regionally, and if your expansion plan calls for national, we want to know that who are out there.
Right.
That's important. So, basically know your business and know the context within which your businesses operate in the industry. So that's the first stage. And also, obviously, how big is the market, and what really is the value proposition? What makes you so special? When you get through all that, then is the verification part. Everything you told me, I want to verify. And it may be that, for market, like some of these forecast type things, I may want to see third-party forecasts. Like, why do you think that? Or maybe it was your in-house forecast. I want to see that. I may want to call your customers. Do you have some that I could talk to that won't be spooked? So be thinking of, how could I verify everything I say? And that's that part. And it could go anything from all the securities, like if this is not the first time you fundraise, your cap table may be very complicated. I'm going to want to see all the documents of the previous rounds. I'm going to see your certificate of incorporation, and anything that you can think of, major contracts, things that might materially impact your business. I will want to verify. But that's usually if you get to that part, that means the VC is already very interested in you. And as long as you have been presenting it accurately, that part shouldn't be a problem. It's just the paying.
I gotcha. So it just takes time to get there, and it really knowing your goals ahead of time is kind of the backbone, as I said.
Right.
Okay.
Because you don't even want to go the first part if you're not the right fit.
Right. And I think that echoes throughout life in a number of situations. Really knowing the end goal before you get started. But as a startup company, we always see these big numbers that are put out there where this company went to this accelerator and scaled by this amount for their their valuation, and that's what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis. But as far as a small business goes, what kind of resources are out there where they can, if they wanted to stay a small business and family owned and operated, or they wanted to be employee owned, there's a bunch of different options. What kind of resources can an entrepreneur tap into that they can learn about, all the wealth of knowledge that you have, can go to them a little bit?
Right. Well, I would say first thing first is, depending on what stage you're in, there are actually a lot of incubators, accelerators, and a lot of local universities now run these business programs, and they're not always aimed at people with just an idea, right? A lot of times, frankly, you have some crazy ideas, and boom, 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 you actually built something, and at that point you go, wow, I really haven't taken the time to think this through, and now I have all these issues. I think there's actually a lot of free resources available. I would start there. And granted, you get what you pay for, and sometimes free is just that, a bunch of people with crates. But sometimes you get enough of an insight to make some strategic tweak, and that will make a big impact. And then from there, hopefully, in the process of participating in some of these programs, you would then, a lot of them are sponsored by either local universities or the city themselves, and a lot of economic development entities. And in every city, there are different names. They tend to be a good starting point, and from there you will meet people that will take you to the next level.
That's awesome. I think that's a real resource to look locally when you're scaling nationally, because the people locally are going to be the ones who benefit usually the most.
Right.
A big question. Yeah, really. A big question that we get often is, should I require a angel or a distributor or a venture capitalist to sign an NDA so that they don't steal my idea? Now on our end, I think it's a bit comical, but you may have a very good reason, a better answer for me than no.
So I think part of it is understanding who you're talking to. So let's say you went to a strategic investor, someone who might potentially buy your business. Yeah, you want to be careful, because they're making that, do I build this in-house or do I buy you kind of situation. Then you don't want to give them all your secret sauce, because then it makes them so much easier for them to say, I'll just build this in-house. Right. But for an institutional investor like ourselves, we by policy don't sign unless it's a very special situation for a very niche thing. So we don't sign because we see so many people coming in, and it's very easy for us to see 2 or 3 or 4 of the similar ideas.
Right.
And if one decide to sue us, it's really hard for us to even sort out who told us what, because, and frankly, this is our business. We're not interested in going and replicate your business.
Right.
Then there may be other people who likes to build your business, and somehow we sat in the middle and we got creamed. So a lot of institutional investors won't sign. Now, what I would do is, if we're actually talking, and suppose I'm actually really interested, and we got to the end where I'm actually doing the verification, I'm gonna call your customer. You may say, hey, for this specific customer, I want you to sign an NDA you cannot disclose, because I promised them I would never say this, and then I will sign. For something very narrow, I will sign, but only if we're talking about something very serious. If it's up front, I'd almost rather say, we can sign. You might just want to talk to somebody else.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a big mistake that a lot of businesses make. We've seen a lot of people pass through where, if we didn't sign an NDA, they wouldn't talk to us at all. But speaking about mistakes, what would you say the biggest mistakes that businesses make when it comes to either seeking investment or scaling up through a loan?
Okay, so a couple things. I've seen people get too much money, and I've seen people get too little money.
Interesting.
So the too little money situation is, if you truly need this money to execute on a scaling plan, you want to make sure you actually budget everything. Because, right up front, just say, this is how big that round has to be. And think through everything. Because it's very hard when you go for too little money and you ran halfway through, then hit your milestone, and you want to go back to the market and say, I need another chunk to get me through that. Because now all of a sudden you're branded as somebody who didn't deliver. Right. So that's one, is however much you need, scale it up front, talk about it and understand it. No, so it's possible that you say, hey, investors, I want the tranched investment because I can get you here. And then when you come in the next time, because I've de-risked it, I wanted now a better valuation. That's possible. Okay. And in fact, if you structured it that way, people would look at it and say, well, that's a real intelligent way of doing it, and it's fair for both sides. But if you simply didn't think about it and then also you ran out, then you're in trouble. I've seen people get too much money also. And this comes in, usually you see it more often in the Bay Area and whatnot. We operate in Florida. Usually it's too little money was the problem. Too much money means that people raise this big amount of money and they started spending crazy and unintelligently. And it's very tempting. When you have that much money, you start thinking, my gosh, I need a party to increase the morale. And blah,
I need a water slide for my office.
Right. We've seen that too. And also you'll bring on all these people. You think you need one guy to do one kind of marketing, another guy to do yet another. You just naturally start doing that. And that tend to be, sometimes you just can't make. Remember, they want 3 times their money back in 3 years. Yeah. So if you can do that, then we've got, issues.
So it's really to kind of stay with the lean model that you have set up initially, kind of when building, to continue with that.
Yeah, but always remember to be, thoughtful with your truly what you need, ask for just the right amount.
Interesting. And as far as, if you were building a retail business, if you were bringing a product to market, or if you were trying to, grow your retail store, what's the best thing that you can prepare your business, today for success, this year?
So I guess I would say, getting market traction is obviously a big one. And earlier we had talked about these kind of, Kickstarter, GoFundMe, whatever, like these kind of essentially pre-order, actually Kickstarter, not so much GoFundMe, pre-order. That I've seen a lot of people getting their initial traction that way. Yes. Another way to think about it, like, if, for example, if some of the listeners out there are, you've got one cool product and you're trying to figure out how do I blast it open and get all the big retailers to carry me. One thing to think about is what their challenges are this year or the recent years, right? Mm-hmm. All the brick and mortar people are having the trouble in that everybody is starting to drift online. Yet they have all this real estate. So anything that is interesting enough that can draw people in will be of interest. And so I don't, some of the audience out there, everybody has got a product, or maybe some people are also in the retail tech space. Mm-hmm. Retail tech people, especially, you think about, if I want all these big brick and mortar to do business, anything that can bring people in will be terribly interesting.
That's excellent. That's an amazing piece of advice to end on. So I'd like to conclude there. And I'd love it. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate your insight. I think that helped a lot of people. So thank you so much.
Thank you.